All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Appalachian Gateway Communities webinar. It is 1 p.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. First, a few introductions before we get started, and I want to say hello and thank you for joining us. This is our second in a series of presentations throughout the year on a variety of tools, resources, and more related to supporting and developing thriving gateway communities across Appalachia. My name is Katie Allen, and I'm the Director of the Conservation Leadership Network for the Conservation Fund. And before we jump into our feature presentation with Cheryl Hargrove on Appalachia and the arts, the role of arts in rural economic development and cultural heritage tourism, I just want to take a moment to provide a little more information about the Appalachian Gateway Communities Initiative and acknowledge the generous support of our partners, the Appalachian Regional Commission and National Endowment for the Arts. Since 2008, the Conservation Fund has partnered with the Appalachian Regional Commission and the National Endowment for the Arts on this initiative that helps gateway communities. And by gateway community, we define those as communities that are adjacent or close to public lands. These could be national parks, wildlife refuges, state forests, etc. And we've partnered to work with these communities to identify and leverage their natural resources, preserve local heritage and character, introduce the role of arts in community projects, and all to support and drive local asset-based economic development. The program has reached hundreds of communities in 10 states across Appalachia, providing technical assistance in various forms, including regional workshops, place-based workshops, sustainable tourism assessments, small grants, resource toolkits, and this year we've added a webinar series to the list, which is very exciting. Each year the program is a little bit different, but across the board with the work that we have been doing in partnership with these groups is to focus on the overall goal to support gateway communities to build thriving local economies and preserve their local landscapes, arts, cultural heritage, and so much more of what makes these places unique. I've put the website to this initiative here on the slide for you to check out additional resources such as the assessments and toolkits that I mentioned, as well as recordings of previous webinars, and this is where you'll find the recording of today's webinar as well. And we are continuing to update the site with more case studies, so we'll be posting more there, so keep checking back. I did want to take a minute to tell you all a little bit about the Conservation Fund, and I encourage anyone that is not familiar with our work to visit our website at conservationfund.org to learn more about what we do. Overall, we are a national nonprofit environmental organization that has protected over 7.8 million acres of land since 1985, but we are unique to the environmental field, as what sets us apart is that we have we are the only conservation organization with a dual mission to work at the intersection of conservation and sustainable economic development. We believe that you can have both thriving economies and thriving natural landscapes and ecosystems, and our partnership in the Appalachian Gateway Communities Initiative is no different, and a great highlight of how this can be realized on the ground. As I mentioned before, I'm representing the Conservation Leadership Network, a program the Conservation Fund that serves as a technical assistance service provider that forges on-the-ground solutions related to achieving conservation and sustainable economic development goals. We use a variety of tools and services, many of which have been applied as part of our work with the Appalachian Gateway Communities Initiative, but we also work nationally, providing workshops, assessments, grant programs, and consulting, and additional services founded in collaborative learning and capacity building on a variety of topics related to conservation and community and economic development. So that is us in a nutshell, and I invite anybody interested in learning more to reach out to us for more information on how we can work together in the future. But as it relates to the Appalachian Gateway Communities Initiative, I did want to mention that there will be program opportunities coming up. Though we do not have any workshops for the remainder of the year, we hope that to have a 2018 list for you to save the dates in the next year. And additionally, we will continue the webinar series, knowing that the summer is a busy time for our Gateway community partners. We'll be announcing the next webinar once things slow down in the fall. So stay tuned for both. And again, the website is there and my contact information. And with that, in just a minute, I will turn control over to Cheryl Hargrove for her presentation. As But as a quick introduction, just Cheryl of HTC Partners will present on the role of the arts in rural economic development and cultural heritage tourism. The arts and artists offer a distinct opportunity to enhance the personality of place, and there's no better person to tell us more about that than Cheryl. She's a 35-year travel industry veteran. She is best known as the National Trust for Historic Preservation's first director of heritage tourism. And while at the National Trust, she developed the key steps and principles for sustainable tourism, focusing on history and culture. With an emphasis on arts, culture, and heritage tourism, Cheryl has worked with a diverse collection of clients over the last 3 decades. A native of Georgian, Cheryl has consulted on cultural heritage tourism projects in all 50 states and more than 10 countries. Before we get started, a note on logistics. I will now hand control over to Cheryl, hopefully without any technical glitches. And though all participants are muted at this time, please use the chat box or the question box to send any questions to me. I'm Katie Allen, or you can send to the full group in the webinar toolbar. And I'll do my best to facilitate a discussion with those questions at the end of Cheryl's presentation. So navigate to the chat box or the questions box in the toolbar if you have any questions. So with that, let me change to Cheryl, and we'll get started.
Oh, well, there we go. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time today to learn more about one of my favorite subjects, which is the role of arts in rural economic development and cultural heritage tourism. It's my pleasure to share some insights about what's happening in cultural heritage tourism and the opportunities for the arts to be more involved in this space. So I'd like to get started because I think it's important we just understand on a level playing field of what is art and where do you find it. And I thank Tony Ty with the National Endowment for the Arts for providing some of these images. Certainly we see the arts in historic theaters and opera houses as well as choral groups, but we also see it in country pickings and gatherings as well as in bandstand concerts. And I think we need to be reminded that art can be located wherever you can gather people, and it can also be on the sides of barns as a mural, or it can be experienced as an interpretive exhibit. So it also includes the human element, and again, I think we sometimes think of art in a very physical and visual component, but it is also the oral traditions that are so rich and ripe, especially for Appalachia. But I think it is critical as we talk about storytelling and our human assets that we consider just their needs as well as what they bring to a visitor experience, as well as just enrichment of our local community. Certainly we have heritage fellows that are located around the country, recognized for things such as bobbin lace making or the wonderful quilting in Gee's Bend. But I think it's important that we go beyond perhaps what we think of the traditional high arts to think about arts of place. Why are arts important? Well, these are just a few reasons that I'm sure you can add to, but we can't discount that personally it has an impact. I know that, for instance, the drama teacher that was just announced is going to receive a Tony Award on Sunday night, was not only a great drama teacher, but she also helped as far as the enrichment of her students and the education of those students, and was a key leader and inspiration to them. There's also that community benefit, and certainly can add to the enhancement of place physically, as well as maintaining the soul of place. And that is important, especially when we're talking about cultural heritage tourism, to have that distinctive personality that separates one community from every other, one region from every other. And I think that Appalachia has come into its own with regards to its own brand and really defining its people and place embraced in the space of its mountains, but also its valleys. And to that end, we need to look at the definition of cultural heritage tourism. And while I was at the Trust, we came up with a definition. It has morphed a couple times in the last 25 years, just to really focus more on experience. And if there's one word that I hope that you'll gather from all of this, it's that it is focusing on authenticity. Traveling to experience the places and activities that authentically represent the stories and people of the past and present. It's very inclusive. It includes historic, cultural, natural, and tangible resources that are unique and distinctive to the destination, both traditional and contemporary. The past to present, so that it's not just a living history museum, but it is really a dynamic place that represents where people live, work, and play. Now, I must make a distinction here when we talk about cultural heritage tourism, in that some people call it cultural tourism, some people call it heritage tourism. A group of us back in the 1990s decided that cultural heritage tourism was a more inclusive term, because at the end of the day, people don't really go out and say, today I'm going to be a cultural heritage tourist. They indeed say, I want to go to some place that's distinctive, that I'm going to have an interesting experience, and it's going to satisfy my overall travel goals. And so this is more about how, in looking at the profile of the cultural and heritage traveler, that it came together, where the visitor to historic sites often engaged in cultural activities or arts activities, and so looking more about who is visiting. I like the Vermont Arts Council definition as well, though, because it is defining character, essence, and providing for collective memory, so that it is not only just about the visitor experience, but it's also about a way of retaining those kinds of attributes. And when we talk about attributes, we do need to look at some categories that are included in cultural heritage tourism and how the arts are involved in that. Certainly the performing arts, the visual arts, the makers, the culinary arts. You know, culinary tourism has really grown. Certainly Bon Appetit Appalachia has demonstrated that, as well as film and music. But let's face it, we all travel on our stomach, so helping to have that distinctive dining experience is almost becoming as important as having that great attraction experience or that entertainment experience. When we look at culture as a category, it is also looking at those centers and events that are significant expressions of a local culture, and that can either have exhibits or have demonstrations or having performances that interpret and present a community character and its culture, whether that be an indigenous population or whether it be a traditional or even a contemporary tradition that is important. And then heritage is evident in historic sites, activities, events, but it's also archaeology, it's architecture, and it's also landscapes. And I think sometimes we think about just the built environment, and we don't think about the natural landscape that is so important, because it talks about movements of people. And you wouldn't have Appalachia if you didn't have the mountains. And so helping to understand those nature-based connections is very important in looking at cultural heritage tourism, and how people connect with land, whether artists are using natural elements in their production, or whether they are, in fiber arts or in their mediums. Helping to explain what makes something local is important. There is a holistic approach, though, that I'd like to talk about in the framework of arts, that begins with the time when you walk in, or you drive in, or you fly into a destination. and immediately that gateway, that signage, the visitor information center, the roads, the bridges, all of those elements contribute to what you think of a place, that first impression. And then you'll go into and maybe experience a museum or a tour or a play or an event. You may do a walking tour of a neighborhood, something that is distinctive and local. And in the meantime, you'll also be dining and shopping, which is important. And hopefully you're going to stay overnight, because that's where our cultural heritage travelers really like to immerse themselves. And so therefore having that lodging opportunity that not only increases the economic impact of a community, but also then allows the visitor to become more aware and educated about the opportunity. And then it's great host. And we're finding that more and more visitors want to eat like a local, go where locals shop, visit with locals, and have that engagement. Again, helping people think about, why am I going to leave my own convenience at home? I want to have something that is going to be distinctive. So as we look at the opportunities for cultural heritage tourism, I think it's important that we always are mindful of what the consumer is thinking, because you can't have tourism without visitors. And typically visitors are 50 miles or 100 miles away from home, and they're going either for business or leisure, typically leisure travelers. But it is important to understand what's in their psyche, and they're very different than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And so being mindful of consumer trends is a way to stay on top of opportunities to grow cultural heritage tourism, and to really make sure that the arts are at the table. According to the most recent report from Mandela Research LLC, it's a 2013 report, 76% of the U.S. population that went on a trip engaged in cultural or heritage activity, and they spent $171 billion. Now, one of the most important considerations of why cultural heritage tourism is an attractive market is something that we found out back in the 90s and has been solidly analyzed and demonstrated in the last 30 years. And that's basically that cultural heritage travelers tend to stay longer, they are a more frequent traveler, and therefore they also will spend more than general leisure travelers. So people involving and engaging in cultural or heritage activities spend approximately $1,300, whereas general leisure travelers spend about $820. Another aspect of them that is particularly attractive is that they're more likely to stay in a bed and breakfast or distinctive lodging. They are willing to stay overnight, which is very good news for all of us. But we have to be aware of some interesting trends that are coming up. And I've shown on the screen for you one of my favorite things to look at every December, which is the JWT Intelligence Report of 100 trends that are changing things in a variety of categories, which I'll share in a minute. But I think it's important that we recognize that in the last 25 years, cultural heritage tourism has grown, but so has competition. When I first started with the National Trust, there were 17,000 museums. Today, there's over 35,000 museums. That means that there's a lot more competition out there. We also have a more savvy customer who has a smartphone at their ready and who is willing to make sure that they can access information, and their expectation is much higher because of the impact of technology. They can test anything that is shared with them as to whether it's authentic or true or not. We also have where it becomes more and more important to understand the disruptive business models such as Airbnb and Uber and all of the kinds of share economy businesses that may impact the traditional ways people did business. They are an opportunity for cultural heritage tourism, but they also can be a challenge as it's a new distribution model. So what are some of these consumer trends? Well, I've hit a couple of them that I think are most important, and that is absolutely the focus on experiences over goods. This is particularly true of millennials, but it is something we see where even in the Mandela report from 2013 said that 72% seek travel experiences where destinations, buildings, or surroundings retain a historical character. They really want to experience something that is distinctive that they don't have in their own backyard. The second point is about how much noise is out there and how we will have to really make even more significant impact on getting someone's attention over everyone else that is trying to vie for consumers. Some of these others that I think are interested is civic data, as we'll talk about placemaking in a moment. Civic data is just using that way to help people make more informed decisions. Wi-Fi disruptors, there are some travelers and some individuals that are saying, I need a place where I can go where I can just experience without technology, without option or something that's going to take me away from my own relaxation or enjoyment or being in a place. Augmented reality, there's certainly been a lot with Pokemon Go and Techucation and looking at the new Gen Z that is just graduated, so they are the new audience, no longer the millennials.
Cheryl, sorry to interrupt you. Can you hear me? Cool. Technical difficulties with your audio?
Oh.
Let's see.
You have me now?
We have you now, yes.
Okay. Where did you lose me?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I definitely Pokemon Go.
Okay, all right, so you haven't missed much. So, but going into Gen Z, which is the newest audience that is coming on board, that we need to pay attention to what their desires are going to be. These were the school groups that we hosted at historic sites and in arts education programs, and looking at now that they're adult travelers, what will they desire in a cultural heritage experience? Elemental hospitality, I think, is one of the really interesting things about how getting back to nature, and where even a hotel has in Switzerland has actually set up a bed for $300 in the middle of a field and charging so that you can have a truly back to nature with a toilet only 10 miles away. So, you know, some out there kinds of trends coming up, but all as a opportunity of trying to attract people to interesting ways of experiencing destinations. Closer to home, I think it's important that we look at some travel segments that are important, and homeschooling and family travel is on the rise. But it's also more about smaller groups and niche markets that are looking for interesting itineraries. 66% prefer a leisure travel that is educational. So there needs to be some kind of learning experience, and certainly when we look at multi-generational, that is an important consideration. I happen to be on Friday taking a group from the Georgia Tech Foundation. These are board members of a alumni organization that is looking for a major university on a historic rural churches tour. And we are actually having a gospel choir come in. We are having a potluck Sunday supper served as their meal to really talk about the social impact of churches in the South. And so looking at those kinds of niche programs that can be very tailored for a particular audience is something that is on the rise. And certainly we're seeing that the National Trust has increased its study tour program. The Educational Travel Conference has had one of its largest programs over the years. And we see more and more of these kinds of alumni groups and educational groups that are wanting to do not only their big international programs, but are needing to do smaller programs that are good for their younger alumni, 3-day, 4-day programs. That provides a great opportunity for Appalachia and its educational tourism program. So how do we use art in rural economic development? Well, I'd like to focus on 5 specific strategies because I think that we often default to maybe just attractions or festivals, but the arts can be used in so many different ways, and certainly to contribute to cultural heritage tourism. So let's first talk about the arts and planning. Recently, there has been a lot of talk about placemaking, and you'll see the definition here that it's really harnessing the power of arts, culture, and creativity to serve a community's interest while driving a broader agenda for change, growth, and transformation in a way that also builds character and quality of place. But I think it's also equally important we talk about placekeeping. And Robert Bedoya is also a father of what's called spatial justice. And making sure that we don't lose the essence of cultural values and what people who live in a place have done all their life, and those kinds of architecture, craft, and characteristics that really define how a place was and is today. So how do we do this? Well, I know Becky Anderson is on the line, and Asheville has sought out 6 local authors who are writing a prologue for the city's 20-year plan. And there's 6 themes. So each author is setting up that particular plan as an introduction. And I don't know whether Becky wants to share a few more comments about that process and how it's come to be, if you're available.
I am. Can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, good. And I just wanted to tell you, we finished the prologue. The consultants who are working with the city had never used this idea before, and they determined that it was perfect for what they term a creative city, which we think Asheville certainly fits that title. But each author had written a book or else was immersed in the studies of Appalachia that wrote about a theme. And the city just said, we got to use this. We didn't know it had ever happened before, and the consultant said, we've never used this as a prologue before. So there's nothing like being everybody's test model. But all the authors agreed, and it worked out really well, and it goes online next week sometime for the first draft for the city.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Becky. And you know, it's those kind of ideas of just presenting that we'll talk about later in the presentation, but about how being at the table is important. I like this next one where the Western Folklife Center just asked people, you know, what is your vision of the West? And then took all of that information and did it as an exhibition. Again, a way to help interpret and to share information, and that gets residents involved, but also then in the planning process that is very key. And sometimes we forget that we can be at the table from the start, not as a follow-through or just for implementation and marketing. The next place, though, is in gateways and infrastructure, another area that I think we are starting to get more involved with from an arts concept, certainly with public art projects, but I think it can go further. And I'd like to share a few examples, but I start with this quote always, and it is so true that we need a positive first impression. And that certainly is something that we all need to think about in driving into our destination, in driving into our historic downtowns, and driving even to the front of our community or our attraction. What does it look like, and what message does it send? Cripple Creek, Colorado, I think, did a great job of really helping to articulate who they are just by having a roadside sign. And think about, if you're in Sandy Hook, Kentucky, which sign is going to be more appealing to you? The one on the top where it's metal is all rusted, and even though it's the home of Keith Whitley, it's got a picture of a bird. You know, that's not telling the story. That's not who you want to be. Instead, thanks to a local artist and a musician friend of Keith's, they actually came up with this new sign and have now something that is much more appropriate for the community. But I would be remiss if I didn't talk about one of my favorite places, which is Lucas, Kansas, population 300. This is their gateway. And at the base of their byway, you can actually, in central Kansas, you know, you get a sense of who they are just from this signage. And they have designated themselves as the grassroots art capital of the world. They're owning it. But they've carried that through into what they call their Bowl Plaza. And this actually is their brand new restroom, public restroom, $117,000, $33,000 of it which in kind, where artists provided designs. The bottles and mosaics were donated, and it sets a statement in this town, again, where it's carried through and very distinctive. It was actually named the second best public bathroom in America by one of the toilet bowl manufacturers. And how one of the ways that they raised money for this is that they actually had a toilet seat auction that they were able to raise $3,000 from in order to help pay for this. So I think being this fits for them, and they spent time and recognized that that was a need, but they didn't want to have just a typical convenience center. They wanted to have something that carried through and was a reflection of their community. The same thing with bicycle racks. You can make them just a standard rack, or you can make something very interesting. Again, something that is significant of place. And I know we talk about rural communities, but I think this is a great example of what's done in an urban center that could be translated. This happens to be the public parking lot next to the Kansas City Library. And so they actually decided to have a public competition on what are the 10 major reads that are most significant for Kansas City or connection to Kansas City. And each of these are a mylar that covers up the parking deck to make it much more attractive than perhaps some of the parking decks that we see around our own communities. Again, a way to make this more distinctive and to look at every building, every site, every place as an opportunity to make a stamp, to utilize arts as a way of putting into personality of place. So let's go on to attractions. And one of the things that we always focus on are attractions, but I think that there's some different ways to deal with attractions. And Becky Anderson and I worked in a place called Ludington, Michigan, and this is a story of two school teachers who decided to start a museum in part to have something for children to do, but also this is a next to a state park, a lot of outdoor recreation, and it provided an opportunity for what kids could do when it rained. So it was a inclement weather opportunity. But they also, before they moved to this Main Street building, the Sandcastles Children's Museum, they actually looked at what were the kinds of exhibits that would be best for them. And I particularly like the fact that they have what they call the Badger Playship. That happens to be, the Badger is their historic landmark, National Historic Landmark ferry that goes on Lake Michigan. But they also use the ice cream store. They also used a local bank. They have all kinds of exhibits throughout the entire space that are about their community. So the children that come in, locals, learn more, but also so do visiting kids. And it becomes a place of education about their community. The next example is the Blue Ridge Music Trails, and I know that Angie Chandler is also on the line. This is an important music trail that was featured when they were just getting started to really help focus on how to get people to the places where musicians play, those venues, as well as to events that really speak to the heart of Appalachia. I'm going to, before I ask Angie to share a few remarks, I'd like to just share the story of the Earl Scruggs Center. And I think this is a story that resonates probably with a lot of people. You have a historic courthouse. This happens to be from 1907 that is abandoned, as this one was in 2004. And what do you do with this kind of landmark, especially when it is a cornerstone or a central feature of a main street that you want to make sure doesn't die as a result of people no longer going and doing court business? So there was a group in 2007 excuse me, that organized to look at options and revenue generation opportunities, as well as something that was going to be marketable. Really looking at something that was going to be distinctive. And the Earl Scruggs Center opened in 2014. The local Sun, well-renowned, had left a lot of artifacts and other things that could be utilized. And the $6.2 million, 10,000 square foot facility now hosts about 25,000 visitors a year from 49 states and 13 countries. So it has definitely become a catalyst to draw people back downtown. And nearby is the Don Gibson Theater, which was a state movie house that also shut down, but reopened in 2009. Seats about 400 people, and they now bring in about 30 acts a year. But as you can see on the right, the Earl Scruggs Center is dynamic, has a lot of interactive exhibits, and utilizes the courthouse, that historic building, in a very dynamic way. But these are just a few of the projects that are part of the portfolio that the Blue Ridge National Heritage Area has been involved in. And I'd like to see if Angie would like to share some more. I know you've got some news about the Craft Heritage Trails guidebooks.
Hi, Cheryl. Thank you for inviting me to share just a few comments. Yes, working with Becky Anderson and also now working with the Appalachian Regional Commission and the North Carolina Arts Council and the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina. We are redeveloping the Craft Heritage Trails for Western North Carolina starting this summer with phase 1, which will be an 18-month project. And we've been very involved with the music trails, supported the North Carolina Arts Council, and have been a true partner. I think some of the great things that have helped the music trails overall, because it's a large area, 29 counties are a part of the music trails, and it's important to have community engagement and boots on the ground, and also to offer some general promotional opportunities to help these very rural communities connect with the trail through signage. Like you saw, we have banner signs, we have festival signs, we have a marketing toolkit, we have a huge events calendar, and we also have Facebook and other communications, especially digital communications channels, to help get the word out. And a recent survey showed that about 69% of those locations that are on the trail, which is overall throughout the 29 counties, is about 150 sites of festivals, jams, and event sites. 69% said the trail was assisting them in bringing in some audience members, and another 75% said that just being a part of the trail was uplifting for them and was like a good housekeeping seal for them.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope that one thing that everyone will remember is that as we move forward, it's so important to have that kind of documentation, that kind of feedback, because that's what builds our story and allows us then to be at the table when we have the kind of statistics that you've just shared. And I know that the first Craft Heritage Trails Guidebook did some of the first surveying, and that led to then other trails saying, wow, I want to embrace that. It also led to the Farms, Garden, and Countryside Trails when visitors were asking for more information. That kind of feedback, and that's where cultural heritage tourism depends on the feedback from our customers to be able to help us know what we're doing well, what they'd like to see more of, and then also where we have areas of improvement. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll look forward to hearing more about those upcoming trail guidebooks or social media or other ways in which you'll be sharing that information. And these also then spill off into other kinds of themes, such as literary trails, and looking at how to utilize the kinds of notable people that you have in your community, past or present, and making sure that you can carry on those opportunities. This is Google Lit Trips. They actually, 2 teachers started this just to help map all the places in a particular guide, in a particular book. You see the Grapes of Wrath in the California route that it has, but you can actually go in and suggest titles, and they will help as far as building an itinerary based on a particular book. This is particularly good if you're wanting to attract homeschoolers and other kinds of things. Literature being a great way to help even visitors. I mean, think about if every destination gave you a reading list before you visited to learn more about your destination. Wouldn't that be a fabulous thing? So thinking of how all of the literature side fits in, as well as the visual and the performing side. This actually is in western, it's actually in the PA Wilds part of central Pennsylvania, and this is the National Elk Refuge Interpretive Museum. And what's interesting about it is their museum is very interactive. It has surround AV that is 4D. It also has snow that comes down as it talks about the introduction of the elk. It also has a figure sitting around a campfire and telling the story of place from a grandfather to a grandchild. And so helping again build in those kinds of interesting ways of learning is important. And so thinking about an attraction that has both an educational venue, it can have a multi-purpose use, is important. I mentioned though that it's also important that we not just have attractions, but we think about how this carries through into lodging. These are 2 examples, one in New Orleans, but one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where the arts are definitely integrated into the actual experience. And I go back to the Mandela study that said 49% of cultural heritage travelers will pay more for distinctive lodging, accommodation, or other kinds of overnight that relate to the culture or heritage of a place. And thinking then about, again, that whole essence of experience that is found in the food as well as in the stay. Now, this is, again, I think we take a little stretch here, but Nashville is not urban, I mean, not rural, but it does show an opportunity that even our sports areas can be then have an more place-based and have an artist influence. And if we're trying to get kids involved, or we're trying to look at families, this is a great way of being able to help tell your story and not just have the same kind of mini golf that every location has, but something much more distinctive. Attraction that is, I think, also sometimes overlooked is sculpture parks. And this happens to be a 43-acre sculpture park in St. Croix River Valley, Minnesota, that is not only physically and intellectually wide open spaces, but it's where people are inspired to participate in the creative process. So they're actually encouraged to be part of the art experience. And I think we need to think with regards to how open spaces lend themselves to art as well as those kinds of interpretations. Again, back to Ludington, this is actually part of their sculpture trail that has expanded to the whole county, and then now up to almost 22 different sculptures that are all privately funded, but really tell their story of the community. Everything from, if you see the horse in the background, their transportation, their maritime, and also their sports. We also need to make sure that everyone is reminded that a real important consideration for all communities, but particularly rural communities, is what can your visitor do at night? And we need to have places that are inviting and welcoming. History happy hours have become very popular, where museums are open from 5 to 7, and people can walk around with a glass of wine. The same thing with First Fridays or gallery walks. But we also need places like the Floyd Country Store, where you can have entertainment, and back to those music trails of helping people find places to go and experience some form of entertainment in the evening that is beyond just having a nice meal. And so that, again, is a way to keep visitors overnight, giving them that reason to stay overnight and therefore spend more money as they incur lodging as well as additional meals. So it's all about making things happen. And it is important that we look at how to keep things fresh. How do we keep things that people want to keep coming back to? Certainly we saw it with adding trails, adding different kinds of experiences. That's important. But it also can be done through festivals and events. And I think one of the ways that a perfect example is certainly the Crooked Road. And the Crooked Road, when it started, was certainly with regards to country music, but it was also about great drives, great attractions, and other kinds of recreational opportunities that could be combined with this distinctive cultural experience. And you see, of course, the map of the Crooked Road, and where there are different locations to go and hear the music as well as see different kinds of activities. One of the most recent activities they've involved in is the Mountains of Music Homecoming, now in its second year. It's 9 days of concerts and cultural events. I think they're up to about 140 different events. And as you can see, just some of the lineup, it's pretty impressive. They've also just recently conducted a crowdfunding Kickstarter campaign and to raise money, where they're actually selling a CD that is of local music. And so looking at being very focused, but also engaging audiences in how they can be a part of this process. social media being a huge driver of sharing performances from last year's concerts as an opportunity to encourage people to come to this year's events starting next week. Another thing that I think we have to look at it with events and festivals is maybe turning them on their head in a bit, so they're not always just at a field or at a park, but this happens to be one that was done called the Paddling Theater in 2013, which was the celebration of the Minnesota waterways. It was their 50th anniversary, and it was a collaboration between the Arts Council and the Clean Up the River Environment. And it was designed really for paddlers going down the river to have these impromptu experiences of drama or music along their route. And so they were able to be more mindful of the role of nature in these kinds of experiences, but have these truly wonderful artistic breaks that added to that overall experience. So thinking about how to add arts in those kinds of recreational opportunities, I think is a real opportunity that we haven't perhaps embraced fully. Certainly chalk festivals can be a wonderful event, but those that bring in also even international artists that can talk about how to do thematic programs. There was one recently, and it was all around Veterans Day and had war heroes as well as significant events that were in the community that helped tell the story. So as you walked along the chalk screens, you really had the story of place. Those again are ways that artists can really shape how our visitors are educated. In Iowa City, Iowa, they have just been designated the UNESCO City of Literature. And it all started because at the University of Iowa there was a 2-day writers workshop. They actually focused on creative writing. They had world-renowned authors that would come in, but now it has grown to a point where the whole city is embracing this and looking at even different phrases on benches and other kinds of ways that they can showcase their distinctive literature. A favorite one of mine, though, is the farm-to-table dinner on Main Street. And this is in Jonesboro, Tennessee, where they started with a farm-to-table dinner, and it was to benefit the local farmers market. And as you can see, there were about 155 people in attendance, but it sells out every year. And it's now become something that visitors want to experience. I mean, once you want to be at this table, those are local flowers. It's being catered by a local chef using local farmers' farm ingredients, and it's obviously a beautiful setting. Those are the kinds of distinctive activities, and they've actually had so many requests on how to put together farm-to-table dinners that they now offer this as a toolkit. And if you're interested in that, just let me know and I can send you the link for it. And dining is certainly a way. Eat With is a way now you can go in and you can dine with other locals. You sign up at a table for a specific experience. And I think we really need to focus on how these kinds of experiences are shared so that more people can get to know locals, local foods, and local products. Creative Blackstone does it, recognizing in the Blackstone River Valley that they actually have a program where every month they go to a different restaurant, and a restaurant will actually talk about the origins of food and will share information about their particular signature dish, or how they got to be involved in cooking, or their history with the destination. And so it becomes a very personal connection with the chef and the food and the people. And they pay, and they sign up in advance, and this is done once a month. The Trailing of the Sheep Festival, again, how we have a connection between nature and events, this has actually grown from a concern that some local recreationists in Idaho had, that the sheep who were coming down the mountain in the fall were spoiling their trek with poop. And so we're actually looking for ways to show that the trailing of the sheep is a lifelong heritage component, but to build it into a festival so that they now have sheep herding, they have wool dyeing, they have knitting, they have other kinds of demonstrations, they have an art fair, and a lot of different ways in which to showcase this very important aspect of Southern Idaho's heritage. So looking at how to turn a concern into an opportunity is very important. And one of the key outcomes of the festival is to make sure that they're recording all of the ranchers' stories, so that the history of the sheep herding and the sheep industry is not lost with future generations. One of the other ways that a story can be galvanized into a cultural heritage tourism product, but also be a part of a community, is to make sure that that story is told in its completeness. In Colquitt, Georgia, they use local volunteers, local residents, to actually be cast members. But what the performance is all about is to heal some of the racial tensions and to talk about some of the local residents' stories, some funny and poignant, some difficult, but to really bring the community together. And as you can see, it has a considerable economic impact on the community, and this being very important for not only the small town, but also for a way to move forward. And using the arts and using a quality program, allowing others then to not only learn and be entertained, but also to build community pride. Because at the end of the day, I love this quote by Arthur Frommer, it really is important that every community retains its own sense of place, that authentic personality, and arts, history, and culture ensure this uniqueness. And without that, a visitor will never want to experience something that looks just like everything else. You know, Ed McMahon with the Urban Land Institute talks about the homogenization and how we really need to make sure that we don't lose what represents the very fabric of our community. And the arts are a critical component of that. So the fifth area that we talk about, though, is also having retail products. Let's face it, shopping is the #1 activity for all tourists, whether you're a cultural heritage traveler or an eco traveler or a general leisure traveler. That is what the most people engage in. But it is important to remember that they're probably not looking for things that they can buy here. Even international visitors who come here and look for value and want to buy things that they perhaps are much cheaper here than they can get at home, they're still looking for those kinds of elements, those mementos that are distinctive and that allow them to have something that will resonate when they get home, that they can share and say, oh, look, that is an expression. I'll remind myself of where I visited. So thinking about those kinds of distinctive products or craft or elements that allow us then to carry on that experience is important. And it's not just always from a craft perspective. This happens to be in Virginia City, Nevada, where they introduced a brand new product called Cemetery Gin. Gin was the drink of choice in the late 1800s when all the miners came in, frankly, because it was better than drinking the water. And so they have now created cemetery gin, where proceeds help go to preservation of their local cemetery, because it is a historic cemetery that has a lot of notable residents buried there, and it is a major tourist attraction. So now buying the cemetery gin is not only something that you can imbibe, but you can also then contributes to a good cause. In Rapid City, South Dakota, the Prairie Edge Trading Company and Gallery was a business that started with two very specific purposes, and I think many galleries we see today have similar ones, but if they don't, perhaps this is something as a reminder that they serve as a way to educate the public about and help to preserve the heritage and culture, in this case, of the Northern Plains Indians, but also to provide these same people, these Northern Plains Indian artists and craftspeople, an outlet to show and sell their finest work. And so we need to be mindful that if we have the arts, we need to be supporting the artists and providing them a way that they can then sell their work if they don't want to necessarily sell it from their own studio. So looking at how there are places where people can find locally made objects is important. I like this picture that I borrowed from Flickr just because I love, I don't know if you can see their little yellow sign or not, but it says roadside culture stand. And somebody has just done a pop-up here with homegrown food and vegetables and honeys and jams. And those are the kinds of experiences that the wanderlust and the cultural heritage traveler enjoy, of being able to pull over and speak to someone who is actually out there sharing their local product. So before I move on to our last part of the webinar, I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions or if there are any comments with regards to the information we've shown.
I think folks are still muted, but if anyone who wants to put any questions forth in the question box.
And that's a great one on the arts of Kingsport, Tennessee. Thank you for sharing. Well, I'll give you a moment to just think about if there are questions or if there's comments you'd like to make. Please type them into the chat section. But I know it's always important that we focus on how to get started. I'd like to give you 6 ideas of how we can advance the arts in rural economic development and cultural heritage tourism. I think the first is to be proactive. Quite often I don't see artists at planning meetings or arts organization that are involved in the front end of projects. And it often comes in that the arts are, or the artist is asked to donate something, donate work as a way of supporting something. Whereas instead of being involved from the mental acumen and expertise, so being proactive of being at the table. It's also important to identify upcoming projects and working so that you know how perhaps the arts can be involved in, whether that's a gateway project or whether that's a road improvement project, if that's a new museum that's coming on board. Is there a way that a arts influence could be a part of that? And quite often it sometimes comes into looking at that, you know, putting together a local list of experts, so that, or a portfolio of potential ideas that you can share with various organizations, whether that's with the Chamber of Commerce or whether that's with Kiwanis or whether that's with Rotary, but helping to articulate, and not just during Arts and Humanities Month or other, when we're talking budgets, but really looking at how to make sure that the arts are always ever present in these discussions and top of mind. Making sure that the arts are included in local newspapers so that people understand how these can be shared. And I think having an idea of potential ideas, wow, couldn't we do something like, this community has done, or what if we did this, or having some kind of competition. Again, being proactive and being able to present that on the front side. I also think that artists are busy. Arts organizations are usually very strained with regards to human resources and are wearing a lot of hats anyway. But if there are ways that you can offer expertise to local planning offices, to your local convention visitors bureau or destination marketing organizations, DMOs, to municipal authorities or development authorities, that helps as far as those individuals thinking that they can be more creative and out of the box thinking, as opposed to just settling through their own comprehensive plan. Because most organizations, most counties, most cities have to have a comprehensive plan or have some kind of strategic plan, have some kind of instruction. Even departments of transportation have to have some kind of public offering or public meeting, or have some kind of planning document, and being able to provide assistance on how yours can be distinctive and unique, whatever that project may be, is important. It's also, I think, important to look at how to collaborate with other nonprofits, to harness resources, to think about funding collectively, to look at how to really stimulate development and marketing opportunities. There's a power in numbers, and joining together allows you a greater opportunity. A community I recently was in decided to start having all of the arts and cultural organizations meet the first Tuesday of every month, and the tourism marketing director would go and just sit in on these meetings just to learn what was going on. And suddenly out of that came a lot of new ideas, not only for marketing efforts, but also how they could involve artists in their collateral materials and social media, also how they could actually build new product or enhance existing product, how they could develop a new trail. And that led them to then focusing in on someone who is actually involved with the planning department and getting the city more involved. So helping to focus on all of those kinds of activities. And then to be persistent. And I think that, we are looking at new generations coming up, people that have been involved in cultural heritage tourism for a long time, have actually, started retiring. So there's a new crop of people coming on board in all aspects of planning and development and marketing and cultural and heritage tourism. And so looking at how to reach out to them and constantly educate is key, and finding ways to make a project work. And once a project is underway, to really celebrate those successes and then be mindful of what else can be done and use those as building blocks. So I want to turn to what Pauline Burns of the New York State Department of Transportation is on a bike tour of the New York State Erie Canal. Mark DeCracker has been instrumental in developing murals and even offered a concept, Mural Mania. And again, New York tell the story for large murals and have a great collaboration with artists in the community. Murals are a fabulous way to actually help not only tell a story from maybe historical perspective, but really to help enhance the aesthetics of place. So thank you, Pauline, for sharing that. Murals certainly help almost give this invitation to wander a community as well, to see, you can have a scavenger hunt of murals of where to go and what to see. And it also can then be a way to cover up a blighted or a blob bridge and turn it into something that is spectacular. Europe does a much better job than we do as far as looking at our bridges, our overpasses, and being able to present them in interesting and both architecturally as well as visually. And I applaud you for sharing that, because certainly murals are a fantastic way to tell stories. So as we move forward, I'd like to just share some resources that might be helpful. And again, this will be available to everyone, but the American Planning Association has some pretty detailed information on how the arts are used in community engagement and participation, and how you can use them in planning. And these are kind of tip sheets to help you think about how you can utilize your arts community in these locally, because it is a way to not only engage residents for even things that aren't used for tourists, but housing and other ways, but also for just community education as well. And raising the awareness is such an important part. The Americans for the Arts, obviously a very strong partner and focus on incorporating the arts in community planning. Art of the Rural, one of the best websites for engaging on examples of arts in rural communities. They have an atlas of rural arts and culture that is phenomenal, and just a lot of great practical information that I encourage you to visit. There's Artscape DIY that really was instrumental in focusing attention on creative placemaking, and has various approaches to how to conduct placemaking exercises. I should also say that the University of British Columbia has actually a creative placemaking and cultural placemaking certificate that you can actually receive, and it is all about how to develop this in your community. The Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning has a great toolkit, and where it is from an urban center, I think a lot of the information is very relevant for any size community, just to look at ideas and how you can then see what is available. Create Equity is a great website that has wonderful articles about examples of artists in rural America and what they're doing to strengthen communities, and really helping when we talk about rural America. There's been comments that rural America is now the inner city, and the fact that it's dying, that there is other issues, health issues and drug addiction and other kinds of things, but that millennials are choosing to decide where they want to live, not where necessarily they want to what they want to work. So helping to strengthen rural American communities is very important to not only America but to the world, because it is such a distinct component of who we are, and helping make sure that we preserve and protect those kinds of lifestyles and distinctive elements of rural America is significant. A couple other sites for consideration include Creative Placemaking. This is a toolkit from the Places Journal that really talks about, again, how to explore the process of creative placemaking from a perspective of before it becomes a crisis, that you're losing the vestiges that make you distinctive, how do you go through that process? So this is a consideration. Then Cultural Heritage Tourism Partners in Tourism. This is a group of nonprofit organizations and federal agencies that gathered together about 25 years ago and really started just to share information about projects and what they were doing. And they decided that, there were a lot of commonalities. Could they even collaborate on different programs? They actually did a summit several years ago. They were very involved with the initial White House Conference on Travel and Tourism, and have since formed this website that has some good information in it. Some of it is dated, but we are working now, the partners in tourism are working to try and update that information so it becomes a repository of reference materials and studies and documents and case studies and other information that will be for use. Certainly the National Endowment for the Arts, funding is always important, and as we look at the 2018 budget, we are uncertain as to what's going to happen with some of these agencies, but for now NEA has several programs that are particularly significant for rural communities, and they are then a consideration for looking at it, as well as your own state arts council. And more states and destinations are looking at what they call tourism development funds or tourism product development funds that benefit certainly art projects as well as historic projects that contribute to a visitor experience. Asheville is one of the leaders. They have given, I think, over $22 million since the program started, and have created everything from the renovation of the Grove Arcade to also the Pack Square improvements. So looking at, again, how to utilize these funding sources as a way to build or enhance cultural heritage tourism products. Virginia also has a program that is very involved and has a tourism financing program. And before we open this for additional questions or any other comments, I'd like to just say that I have just published a book, and it's now available. And if you are interested, you can purchase it with a 30% discount, or if you would like just more, and there's 44 case studies included in this document. So, and it is part of the American Association for State and Local History book series, which has a number of other wonderful publications. And they also do other webinars specific for, either museums or other kinds of small organizations or small nonprofits or small attractions that are needing anything from volunteer recruitment or looking at social media or other kinds of activities. So I'd like to just say, if you have any other questions or want additional information, please let me know. And I think we're a few minutes early.
Yeah, I actually have a few great questions. We'll get some specific ones, and then maybe a broad one that I also hear a lot. But this is one that comes up a lot, and definitely want to hear your perspective on it. So in a rural, small town, we often hear the argument, which comes first, lodging or attractions, or that infrastructure before you really develop the attractions, and wondered if you had any perspective on that.
I absolutely think that it's a critical mass of attractions, and I couple attractions with activities. So that could be attractions, recreation, dining, shopping, but there needs to be enough of a critical mass that would then afford someone the need to stay over. Mm-hmm. And when you look at lodging, we must look at the fact that it's not just during peak season or it's not just weekends, but a lodging facility has to run about 65% occupancy full time in order to break even. So that means that that has to be full that often. And can you then provide that kind of guarantee? Now, we're fortunate that with now Airbnb and VRBOs, and there are other avenues available to provide lodging options. But the key there is making sure that they pay the hotel motel tax or other kinds of taxes so that there is a benefit economically, not just for the owner. The second thing that is important about that is also looking at, you know, if you're seasonal, you know, is there a way to become evergreen first? Looking at offering things year round, and then also looking at, you know, how can you fill in things on Mondays and Tuesdays, or how can you fill things in Wednesdays or Thursdays, and providing a whole host of activities that make it more viable for lodging to come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the other key is charging, and I think we have a tendency not to think that people will pay money for attractions, and that is totally counter to everything that is told. If you're offering a great experience, people will pay for it. And the minimum that you should do is make sure that they have an opportunity to give before they walk out the door. So if you're not charging an admission when you're walking in, make sure that they're aware that you need money to operate, to keep the doors open, so that there's at least a donation box that they can give.
That's great. This kind of ties into it, and maybe you have some examples of this, but another question was, how do you recommend communities tie in with travel agents to direct sales for specialized tourism for custom clients? Do you see that as a trend? And if so, is there an entry to that market that rural communities can get into?
Well, I mean, I think it's whether you're looking at traditional travel agents or online travel agents. If you're talking about online travel agents such as a Expedia, then you have to think about the fact that they're going to take 30% off the top. So if you're talking about traditional travel agents, typically people go to travel agents when they need assistance that they can't do on their own, when something's complex, when they don't have the time, when they're going to go to multiple destinations. So I think it's important to think about that audience. Travel agents perhaps not so much as perhaps tour operators and receptive tour operators, and the travel planners that are with the Educational Travel Conference, such as, you know, the person who plans all of National Geographic's study tours or Sierra Club or whatever. They all attend what's called the Educational Travel Conference. So thinking about what markets you want to reach, but that travel agents may or may not be that audience, except unless you're international. And international, they're still going to go through tour operators. Travel agents will just buy a package. And that's where you work with your state tourism office, who has then international representation overseas, and they work with making sure that your product is included in that tour itinerary or tour package or tour offering.
Great. Yeah, it's an interesting way to package things, and if that's viable, and how to explore that. I guess. And
if I could just mention one of the things with regards to packaging. Packaging is really important if you have what we call, and what people really want with a package is they want to have lodging and air and rental car usually taken care of if they're renting a car. It's the things that they, and then they'll want to have something that's added value. So if it's a ticket to a really cherished event, a music concert or something like that, it gives them a guarantee. That's why people will want a package. They want it easy and they want to be guaranteed. So but there usually also has to be some kind of value based, and you have to offer it at a wholesale rate. So if you're not charging admission, you're just part of a package. You're not, and you'll be included in there, but there will be no transactional kind of opportunity. So that's, again, where depending upon what you're charging in admission or what kind of tourism service or product you're offering, that's packaging is. I'm glad to whomever is interested in package give you a whole more information about packaging, because it's a whole different level of planning.
Great. And I think we have time for one last question, and this is sort of a broad one that came up a few times. And you were touching on it towards the end of your presentation, but if there was a really key takeaway, we had one comment saying, you know, Asheville is really looking at tying health and happiness and sense of place together, so there really is a positive mental health aspect when you're incorporating the health and arts together, and they're really taking charge in thinking about arts creatively. Do you see any other, or what is a key takeaway when you're thinking about the gap between development projects and placemaking, or how do you really reach the non-art lovers or those that are making decisions, and how to really incorporate this into decision-making process? Do you have an overall big tip there, or advice?
Well, I think it is key to understand each person's desired outcome. You know, a legislator is going to want more jobs, more tax revenue. A developer is going to want to have, they'll have a different outcome. And so being able to know what the Tourism Bureau is going to want to know, that they're getting more visitors or more revenue. So being able to articulate how you fit into that piece is important. And I think looking at those non-traditional partners, such as we are seeing a wellness movement, and so helping to infuse the arts into, for instance, parks where they're quiet gardens, where reflective places, or those are all ways that you can help make something distinctive. My one takeaway, though, is don't let someone hijack your authenticity. Every place needs to be itself, and I think that, and that isn't always static. It can morph, it can change in life chapters. Destinations have life chapters just like people have life chapters. You're not the same as a child as when you then are a teen or an adult or married or with children or empty nesters or a senior. But you have to then look at the destination the same way, or your community in the same way, and help reflect that of what you are. And so making sure that you can stay true to who you are is, I think, where the arts can be so instrumental and important, so that we don't all look alike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely, I think, the crux of the whole presentation. So a great way to wrap it up, and remember that those great words that really somebody's not going to visit a area or a town or a place if it's lost its soul. And this is all about really creating that soul and outlet to share that with others. So we definitely want to preserve the uniqueness and why you're so special. So a great notion to end on. And I would want to thank you, Cheryl, for answering those questions and providing such a great perspective and presentation on the arts and its role in rural economic development. Again, I wanted to remind you all that so Cheryl's contact information is up there. There was a couple other questions that on specifics that I'm going to pass along to Cheryl to provide any information. So I'm sorry we're out of time, but also you'll be receiving a email about where this webinar has been posted, as well as where you'll be able to find more information about additional events and opportunities associated with the Appalachian Gateway Communities Initiative. And finally, to thank again our partners, the Appalachian Regional Commission and National Endowment for the Arts, for their support in making this webinar series and the entire initiative possible. A huge thank you again to Cheryl and all of you for joining us. Please reach out to Cheryl and htcpartners.com if you want to see more of the work that she's been doing across the country. And thank you all. If you want to tune into our next webinar or any future event with the Appalachian Gateway Communities Initiative, or as well as working and engaging with the Conservation Fund in the future, please take our information and reach out to us, and we'll help you in any way that we can. With that, thank you all. Have a great afternoon and rest of the week, and enjoy the resources that you've got today, and take care. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.